there was $1 million sitting behind that blue door, how many of us as parents, grandparents, would let our children go through that door knowing that $1 million, if it was spent wisely, probably could set them for life? Now, what if I make a caveat that in order to get that money, they have got to make it into and out of that room safely, and I follow that up by telling you roughly 85 to 88% don't make it out alive. How good is that door looking to you now? Now, I don't think many parents in this room would like those kind of odds with your own children. 85 to 88% not making it out alive. How many of us would actually still send them in? And yet, those are the actual numbers that we're seeing leave the church every single year when we send them off to college. We're losing 85 to 88% of our kids. And I know right now most people are sitting here thinking, well, you know, it won't happen to me. Okay, I've yet to meet a parent who woke up one day and said, you know, I think my kids are going to leave the church. It'll be my kids that do. Now, it's always with tears running down their face that they come to me and say, I don't know what happened. I woke up one day and they were gone. This evening, what I want us to do is I want us to get serious for a few minutes and talk about some of the attacks facing our kids. And please understand, I'm going to be one of those guys, you know, many of you have probably seen airplanes lined up waiting their turn, maybe over Nashville. Usually about 6 or 7 p.m., you can see lights just waiting. Okay? There are people who speak like that, preach like that, you know, kind of gently wait for the... I'm not one of those kind of guys, okay? I'm the kind of guy that realistically, I like to just kind of land the plane. So let me do that for you. Right now in the church, according to the most current research, it takes 4 adults just to get one faithful child into the next generation. 4 to get one. Now, as you think about that, again, let me land the plane for you. I think Satan's got our children in his hands, and we're doing very little about it. Now, I know the knee-jerk reaction to that is, wait a second, not our kids. Now, the first thing that I would point out is, if we really are the New Testament church, he's already got everybody out there. So where would he have his attention focused in this community? Right here. And you look at me and you say, but still, Brad, not our kids. That's kind of brash. Why would you say that? Well, let me share with you why I would say that. We did an online survey several months ago targeting just teens. It was anonymous. We wanted them to be completely, bluntly honest with us. Now, we did find out where they're living, and I can tell you, literally coast to coast. We asked them all kinds of questions. So here's what I want to do. I want to share with you why I would say that I believe Satan's got our kids in his hands. For instance, in that survey, we learned 39% of our kids have viewed internet pornography in recent months. Now, let me point out something to you. Of the 300 people who took this survey, 97% identified themselves as members of the church. So these really are our kids. And yet you got 39%. By the way, you'll notice this doesn't say 39% have viewed porn. I think that number is actually much, much higher. This said in recent months they've done it. Or how about this one? 38% of our kids admitted to having cheated in school in recent weeks. Now, some of you may be looking at that thinking, Brad, what's the big deal? You know, it's just a little test. Okay, at what point did we decide that we're no longer going to be a light to this community? Or at what point did we decide that lying is acceptable to God? How about this one? 52% of our kids have absolutely no problem with euthanasia, putting to death a person prematurely. Now, as you look at that, some of you in this room, you may have your your children may have power of attorney over you when you get older. Okay, you may want to rethink that when you go home tonight. Okay, because apparently they don't have a problem putting lights out early. How about this one? 36% think that homosexuality is just an alternative lifestyle. And folks, if that doesn't wake you up, 43% think they ought to have the right to marry. You know what that tells me? That tells me that the world is doing a better job influencing our children than we are. In fact, take a look at this last one. 35% of our kids think abortion should be legal. Now, again, let me remind you, I'm not talking about the world's children. I'm talking about our kids. So I'll say again, I think Satan's got our kids in his hands, and we're doing very little about it. There is quite literally a battle that is going on. James Dobson wrote a book called Children at Risk several years ago. Look at what he said. Nothing short of a great civil war values rages today throughout North America. Two sides with vastly differing and incompatible worldviews are locked in a bitter conflict that permeates every level of society. What is that worldview difference? That worldview difference has to do with basically how we view everything. And believe it or not, they've done such a good job that even many Christians have kind of bought into it. And the reason that I can say that is, if I were to give you a test tonight, okay, let's do the following. Mentally think about this. Let's say that your child, your grandchild, comes up to you tonight after we get done. They're carrying one of those big old picture books. They want you to read to them. So you find your favorite place on the couch, maybe a recliner. You pick them up, you put them in your lap. Let me ask you, do you read them those books, or did you actually notice the first word in the title is prehistoric? Prehistoric actually means a time before man. Most of you probably did not catch that. The reason you didn't catch it is because we've been evolutionized. We basically have been indoctrinated by the world. We don't even think about it. Ironically, had you opened a dictionary back 1766 and you asked the question, where's the word prehistoric? Guess what? It's not there. In fact, if you were to open one of the very early dictionaries put out by Noah Webster of Webster's Dictionary fame, you ask that same question, where's the word prehistoric? Guess what? It's not there. And the reason why it's not there is because it's only been within the last 65 to 70 years that men have begun to accept this idea that we lived long before, or that other things lived long before man got on the scene. So, where are we getting our worldview from? Where will our children place their allegiance? What I want to do for just a minute tonight is I want to give you 6 Bible verses that I hope you'll write down. 6 Bible verses that I hope you'll learn, that I hope you'll pass on to friends, neighbors, co-workers. 6 Bible verses that will help you to kind of lay down a biblical worldview. In other words, if we can get these 6 into our minds as kind of the way we view everything, it's going to change when we grab that book that says prehistoric animals. Take a look. Verse number 1, the easy one. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. I have told literally thousands of people, if you can't trust the first verse of the Bible, why would you trust anything to follow? In the beginning, God did it. And you say, okay, Brad, I hear what you're saying, but exactly when was the beginning? Well, let's keep reading. Colossians chapter 1, verse 16. Paul here says, for by him were all things created that are in heaven, that are in the earth. Paul writing, letting us know that it's a creation event and that God created everything in heaven and in earth. Verse number 3. Matthew chapter 19, verse 4. He answered and he said to them, have you not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female? take a look at that. This is Jesus Christ speaking. And you'll notice he's pointing out that there's been males and females from the beginning. In fact, let me back up. Take a look at how he phrases it in Mark chapter 10, verse 6. Mark chapter 10, verse 6. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. Okay, we got a problem. And the reason I say we got a problem is because all the science textbooks, the history textbooks that my kids are reading in Tennessee, in the school system, say this earth is roughly 4.6 billion years old, and man has only been here for a few million years. And yet Jesus is saying, but from the beginning of creation. Folks, if you don't remember anything else tonight, please remember this. Both cannot be right. Either Jesus Christ, the Son of God, is correct, or some man-made theory is correct. Now, wouldn't it be nice if we could know who that first man was? Which Paul covers for us in our 5th verse. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 45, where he says, so it is written, the first man, Adam, was made a living soul. The last Adam was made a quickening spirit. Who's the first Adam he's talking about there? It's Adam of Adam and Eve, isn't it? Who's the last Adam? That's Jesus Christ. And you say, Brad, what's your point? Here's my point. If you discount that first Adam as a myth or a fable, what are you doing to the last Adam? Because Paul's referring to both of them historically as real. The 6th verse that I would give you is this. Genesis chapter 3, verse 20. Genesis chapter 3, verse 20, where the text says, Adam called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living. Letting us know all the lineage of humanity is coming through who? Coming through Eve. Now, with those 6 Bible verses in hand, here's what you can do. You can sit down with your children, your friends, your coworker, your neighbor. You can open the Bible to your favorite chapter. That's going to be Genesis chapter 5, right? So-and-so begat so-and-so begat. The genealogies. Remember those? The way that I like to teach this when I teach it to folks is I usually will use a timeline. Because to me, you can see and learn so much more when you can visualize it. Take a look at what we find in Genesis chapter 5, verse 3. Adam lived 130 years. He begot a son. He called his name Seth. So we drop 130 on our timeline. And we keep reading. Seth lived 105 years. He begot Enosh. We add 105 to that. We're up to 235. And we keep reading. Enosh lived 90 years. He begot Canaan. We add 90 to that. Now we're up to 325. And suddenly, what we can actually do is we can build a timeline that is telling us the age of the world. You say, whoa, time out, Brad, hold up. How did you make that jump? Because in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It was a creation event, Colossians 1:16. There were males and females there from the beginning. Matthew 19:4, Mark 10:6. Who's the first male? Adam, right? I'm just giving you his lineage. And you look at me and you say, but surely, Brad, you don't think that those genealogies are complete. I mean, surely there's lots of gaps or holes there, right? If you've got a Bible with you tonight, open it up to the New Testament book of Jude. I always like to tell people, turn to Jude chapter 3. Just kind of watch you flip around a little bit. There's only one chapter in Jude. Take a look at verse 14, where we find a New Testament writer talking about Enoch being the 7th of Adam. So we've got a New Testament inspired writer speaking of a guy named Enoch being the 7th of Adam. We go back to Genesis 5, or you can just look up here on the timeline. Lo and behold, there's Enoch. Guess what? He's 7. telling me if you're going to put gaps or holes in the genealogies, it's got to come after this guy right here. And yet, folks, there's not enough gaps or holes in the world to fit evolutionary time into this thing. And in fact, let me share something with you that some of you have never thought of. The vertical line that I just dropped on the screen. You realize everybody to the left of that line could have had a face-to-face conversation with Adam? Because they were living as contemporaries. Now think about that for just a moment. That means that Noah's dad, Lamech, could have actually looked Adam in the eye and said, what was it like before you got kicked out? But the one that's even kind of more impressive to me, if you keep your eye on Noah. Let me keep the timeline going for just a moment. So here we've got Noah, we've got his son Shem. Do you realize everybody to the left of that arrow could have had a face-to-face conversation with Noah's son Shem about what it was like in the pre-flood world? Folks, you're now talking about men like Abraham and Isaac could have looked him in the face and said, what was it like? You see, if you want to teach your kids a true biblical worldview, it doesn't start millions of years ago. It starts with the words, in the beginning, God did it. What did he do? Created everything. Now, I had them make this timeline for me because I wanted you to be able to see it all on a single screen. I realize it's kind of small. But if you look carefully, you'll notice Adam's up here. You come all the way to the red line. That's where we find a guy named Abraham. Promises given to. From Adam all the way to this red line to Abraham is roughly, in round numbers, about 2,000 years. Now, follow me for just a minute. Adam to Abraham, roughly 2,000 years. If we skip over here to Christ, do we have any idea how long it's been from Jesus to us today? I should see heads doing this. Because we're living in the year 2014 AD, right? You know what AD stands for? It's Latin for in the year of our Lord. So again, roughly 2,000 years. Now, follow me for just a moment. Adam to Abraham, in round numbers, is about 2,000 years. Jesus to us today is about 2,000 years. Do you realize if we could bridge the middle, if we could get from Abraham to Christ, if we could just keep following a chronology on down, we'd know the history of the world. You know, wouldn't it be cool if this timeline just kept right on going to Jesus? And it does. Interestingly, here's the funny part. The Bible doesn't just give you one lineage, it actually gives you Mary and Joseph's. Now, folks, here's where atheists have a problem. Because last summer I was in the Museum of History in London. Several of the kings, several of the names that you're looking at on the screen, we've got documentation for, we've got physical evidence for. So I'm sitting here in a museum staring at things that support the men that you see on the screen. That means one of two things. Either this book is absolutely right, and I need to put my faith in it, or somebody got really lucky with their imagination. And folks, let me tell you what. There's too many of them to be considered luck or imagination. And yet, what's the world telling us? The world's telling us we got to have separation of church and state. Can't talk about this in public. In fact, some of you heard Lebanon, Tennessee, they got hit with a $171,000 fine, their school system. Why? What'd they do? They allowed parents to come together every single morning and pray for their kids. One child went home, told his atheist father, Dad gets mad, sues the school system. $171,000 later, that group of praying parents had to disband. Now, bear in mind, these parents weren't trying to evangelize the kids. They weren't converting them. Literally, all they're doing, getting together every morning and praying for the kids. If there's one thing our kids need today in schools, guess what it is? Prayer. Maybe you go the other direction, maybe up to Wisconsin, where we find 8-year-old girl, Morgan Nyman. She and her classmates, they're passing out Valentine cards. You know, you make the little shoebox, and yet she got rebuked because her card said Jesus loves you on it. Now, think about that. You can pass out cards with these immoral pop stars on them, but we can't say Jesus loves you. Go down the other side of I-40, other side of Nashville, Dixon County, where a teacher gave an assignment. She wanted the students to write a research paper. She told them, she said, you got to use at least 4 sources. One of those students, unlike their classmates who wrote about things like witchcraft and reincarnation, one student named Brittany Settle, she decided she would write her paper the life. Gave 4 sources, and yet because of her topic, she received a 0. Folks, that's here. You go somewhere like Houston, Texas. I was there last weekend. 2 sisters walking down a school hallway, carrying a Bible. Teacher spots them. She rebukes them. She actually took them to the principal's office. Now, folks, when I was in school, you go to the principal's office, that was a pretty big deal. Called their parent, wanted to call Child Protective Services. And when mom shows up, teacher took the Bible, threw it into the trash can saying, this is garbage. You see, this is the world our kids are growing up in today. We mentioned last night the fact that without God around, we don't have a moral compass. We don't have a standard anymore. So what does that do? Let me share with you what it does. I took this picture. It's a picture of a Borders bookstore. You'll notice it's got the sign Christian fiction, meaning not true, right? Made up. What's it displaying? Displaying Bibles. Now, I do think that God may have a sense of humor, because any of you in this room that know anything about Borders Bookstore, you know they went out of business. But we shouldn't be all that surprised today, should we? Because after all, everything is going on this idea of humanism. The idea that man is at the top. This is a quote that I want you to remember, because it was said over 25 years ago. This is kind of when the gauntlet was thrown down. It was by a guy by the name of John Dunphy. He's a humanist. He said, I'm convinced that the battle for humankind's future must be waged and won in the public school classroom by teachers who correctly perceive their roles as proselytizers of a new faith. Their teachers must embody the same selfless dedication of the most rabid fundamentalist preacher. For they'll be ministers of another sort, utilizing a classroom instead of a pulpit to convey humanist values in whatever subject they teach, regardless of educational level, preschool, daycare, or large state university. In other words, we're going to teach them this new belief system. Humanism, again, the idea that there is no God, that man is at the top. Most everybody in this room has heard the word. We're not all that familiar with what it really teaches. But let me point out something to you. Humanism is now the backbone. It is literally the core of our textbooks. Now, I could prove it. I could show you all kind of examples. But knowing that this is the core of our kids' textbooks, we probably ought to be plugged into what does it really teach. Let me share with you a couple of their fundamental, foundational planks from the Humanist Manifesto. Humanist Manifesto, it's kind of like their Bible, so to speak. If I were to ask, what does a humanist really believe? We'll take a look. First plank, and these are quotes, by the way. Number 1, religious humanists regard the universe as self-existing and not created. In other words, I put in this little pyramid, there is no God. Plank number 2, humanism believes that man is a part of nature, that he has emerged as a result of a continuous process. Translation, they would say man's a product of evolution. Number 3, holding an organic view of life, humanists find the traditional dualism of mind and body must be rejected. You say, what's that? That's the idea that we have a soul that is separate from our brain, our body. They're saying, we got to reject that. Number 4, humanism recognizes that man's religious culture and civilization, as clearly depicted by anthropology and history, are the product of a gradual development due to his interaction with his natural environment and his social heritage. Translation, they would say that religion is a product of evolution. The 8th plank, to me, kind of sums it all up. Take a look. They say religious humanism considers the complete realization of human personality to be the end of man's life and to seek its development and fulfillment in the here and now. In other words, eat, drink, and be merry, because, folks, they would say there is no God. You don't have a soul. Man's just the product of evolution, as is religion. And yet this is what our kids are being told. I can give you a great example. Hopefully this will kind of really solidify it for you. There's a book that was published. I've got a copy of it in my office. It's a history book called Search for Freedom. It's put out in 1973. 1973, they decided they were going to start getting rid of some of the information on many of our founding fathers because those guys were too religious. So in that book, you will only find 6 lines of text on George Washington. First president, founding father of our country, he got 6 lines of text. Whereas in that same textbook, Marilyn Monroe got 7 pages. Now, folks, think about that for just a moment. This is a United States history book. George Washington, 6 lines. Marilyn Monroe gets 7 pages. In fact, there's a congressman fairly recently was complaining, saying, look, back in 1958, 1964, the textbooks had 10 times more information on George Washington. Here you got a founding father, and yet we're stripping all of this out because he was religious. Now, if that gets under your skin, if that bothers you a little bit, listen to me very carefully. None of those books actually has anything about the creator of the universe, God. That's humanism. The idea that man is what it's all about. And so before you get upset about George Washington being left out of the textbooks, please understand we've now been 30 years without the creator of the universe being put in the textbooks. So again tonight, I want us to learn a little something. Last night we had a history lesson. We're going to have another one tonight, except it's going to be a little bit older. In fact, if you've got a Bible, turn to the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 8, we find Moses here. He is delivering a series of sermons to that second generation of Israelites. You remember, he's got roughly a month to kind of convey all of this information to them before they go into the promised land. Take a look at the warning he gives. Deuteronomy chapter 8, starting in verse 11. Beware that you do not forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments, his judgments, and his statutes, which I command you today. Lest when you have eaten and are full, and have built beautiful houses and dwell in them, when your herds and your flocks multiply, your silver and your gold are multiplied, all that you have is multiplied, then your heart is lifted up, and you forget the Lord your God. I'm going to ask you a question tonight that I hope you'll think very seriously about. Is it possible in the United States of America that we have built beautiful houses, and that our flocks have multiplied, our silver and our gold has multiplied, and somewhere along the way our country has forgotten God? I was having a heart-to-heart talk with my own mom this morning. She was with us. We went to watch my son play basketball, and we were in the car. We had about 10 minutes of just good dialogue back and forth. I was asking her some questions about her growing up. She grew up in Tennessee. And we were talking about the houses that she lived in. She laughed at one point. She said, Brad, do you realize the house that I grew up in as a little girl would fit in most people's master bedroom today? She smiled at me. She said, the entire house. I looked at her and I said, you had 5 of you in that house. I said, where did you all sleep? She said, oh, we shared 2 rooms, 2-bedroom house. She looked at me. She said, you know, coming up through that, I never thought that we were poor. Never thought we missed out on anything. And yet, fast forward to the year 2014. My generation, we feel like if each one of our kids doesn't have their own bedroom, they're suffering. Not just that, they've got to have bedroom, matching furniture. Here's my point. We built goodly houses, folks. And I'm afraid in doing so, somewhere along the way, we started putting worldly success above spiritual success. And you know what our kids are doing? They're following in our footsteps. So Moses gives this warning. In fact, take a look towards the end of that particular book where God basically lays it out. He says, look, these folks, they're going to go and enjoy this pleasure and they're going to forget about me. Look at how he phrases it. Deuteronomy chapter 31, starting in verse 16. The Lord said to Moses, behold, you'll rest with your fathers, and this people will rise, play the harlot with the gods of the foreigners in the land, where they go to be among them. They will forsake me, break my covenant which I made with them. Then my anger shall be aroused against them in that day. I will forsake them. I will hide my face from them, and they shall be devoured. Many evils and troubles shall befall them, so that they will say in that day, have not these evils come upon us, because our God is not among us. So what does Moses do? Moses told the people, literally, Deuteronomy chapter 31, same chapter, a few verses later, he addresses the people and he says, for I know that after my death you will become utterly corrupt. Turn aside from the way which I have commanded you. The evil will befall you in the later days, because you will do evil in the sight of the Lord to provoke him to anger through the work of your hands. And what did they do? If I were to ask you, was Moses right? Yeah. You remember they go in, they take over the land. Each one of those 12 tribes gets an area. And then what happens? Take a look at the screen behind me. They started committing idolatry. Interesting. The average American Christian hears that word, and you know what we do? We don't even blink, because we think, we don't commit idolatry today. And yet, interestingly, while we may not have little statues of Buddha on our mantle, the Bible talks about there being other forms of idolatry, doesn't it? Like Paul writing to the church at Colossae, he said, covetousness is a form of what? Idolatry. Look at the second one. Adultery. God was angry with them because they were committing adultery. Why would I point that out? I would point that out to all the parents in this room because, folks, listen to me. Do not be surprised if your children return home to you at age, say, 27, middle of the night, tears running down their face, telling you that their marriage is over if you've allowed them to watch television shows under your roof all during their childhood that are glamorizing infidelity. Because, folks, what they're doing is they're training in your house. They were doing evil in the sight of the Lord. They were killing children, literally offering them up to the fires of Molech. They were using mediums. Interesting. Take a look at what 2 Kings chapter 17 says. 2 Kings chapter 17, starting in verse 13. Yet the Lord testified against Israel, against Judah, by all of his prophets, every seer, saying, turn from your evil ways, keep my commandments, my statutes, according to all the law which I commanded your fathers, which I sent to you by my servants, the prophets. Nevertheless, they would not hear, but they stiffened their necks like the necks of their fathers, who did not believe in the Lord their God. They stiffened their necks like the necks of their father. So If I were to ask you, what's going on in America today? You see, I think, honestly, we've forgotten that this verse is real. The Bible says righteousness exalts a nation. It doesn't say being an American exalts a nation. It doesn't say that having a lot of money exalts a nation. It says righteousness exalts a nation. You know, we say it, we quote it, we preach it, but I think sometimes we don't really believe it. Because I've met a whole lot of Christians who, deep down, they don't think God's going to humble America like he did Israel and Judah. Righteousness exalt. Take a look at what God said. 2 Timothy chapter 3. Here we find Paul writing to young Timothy saying, "But know this, that in the last days perilous times will come. For men will be," notice this list, "lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors." Any of that sound like what's on the evening news today? It does, doesn't it? See, it's in this situation with Israel and Judah that we find the anger of God being expressed on sin. So 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 26, the Bible says, "Nevertheless, the Lord did not turn from the fierceness of his great wrath with which his anger was aroused against Judah." In fact, it describes one of those kings, Manasseh. It says he made his son to pass through the fire, practiced soothsaying, used witchcraft, consulted spiritists and mediums. He did much evil in the sight of the Lord to provoke him to what? To anger. Now again, we look at something like that and we say, we don't do that. You know, we don't use mediums and spiritists. Interesting, because do you know what the most highly read portion of the Tennessean is? Every single day. It's the horoscopes. You realize we have Christians who read the horoscopes with more regularity than they read God's Word? And so what happens? 2 Kings chapter 24, verse 20, "For because of the anger of the Lord, this happened in Jerusalem and Judah, that he finally cast them out of his presence." Why did he do that? The Bible tells us very plainly. And if we're ever going to learn something, folks, this would be something we might want to learn. Because I'm one of those guys, I'm convinced, if you don't learn from history, what are you bound to do? Repeat it. So, 2 Chronicles chapter 28, take a look at verse 1. "Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king. He reigned 16 years in Jerusalem, did not do what was right in the sight of the Lord, as his father David had done." You skip down to verse 19, it says, "For the Lord brought Judah low because of Ahaz, king of Israel, for he encouraged" what? He encouraged moral decline. If I were to take a poll in this room tonight and ask every single person, do you think that in America we're encouraging moral decline? I dare say I'd probably get 100% yes. Surely in the United States of America, for instance, we're not asking middle school girls to do a lesbian kiss from their classmates. Surely we wouldn't do that, right? Yeah, we did. Surely in the United States of America, we're not now building facilities that have gender-neutral bathrooms. Surely we wouldn't do that, right? Yeah, we are. In fact, the state of Colorado, the one that just legalized marijuana, about a half ago, they passed this law. It's on the books. I've double-checked it. I've been there. If you build a new, say, restaurant, public facility, by law, you must offer gender-neutral bathrooms. That is restrooms where men and women use the same facility at the same time. You ask, why? What's going on? Colorado happens to be one of the leading states for transgender surgery, sex change operations. Those people said, we don't know which one to use. So they petitioned the court. They said, hey, we're being discriminated against. Court said, you're absolutely right. We'll just make them all gender neutral. Now, let's say you look at that and you think, that's not healthy. That's not right. I wouldn't do that. I'm a Christian. Well, folks, if you don't, there's a $5,000 fine and up to a year in prison. And you say, Brad, I can't do this. This is the United States of America. Well, folks, we're already doing it. Great state of Maine has actually already changed their locker rooms to gender neutral. In fact, if you read at the bottom, it says, it would make Maine the first state to implement such guidelines for schools as young as preschool and nursery. And again, you look at me and you say, no, surely not. Folks, don't be surprised because California was the one to pave the way. In several of their school districts, they removed the little boys and the little girls school sign for their bathrooms. And now, little boys and girls use the same facility at the same time. You ask the obvious question, what are they thinking? They give two answers. Number one, they say they don't want any child to have an advantage over another child. Number two, they say they don't want to force a gender identity onto any of those children before they're ready. Now, I know this is going to surprise everybody in this room. I was born in Middle Tennessee, St. Thomas Hospital. And crazy as it may sound to you, my parents knew my gender the day I was born. There was no question about my gender identity. And yet, here we got them saying, I don't want to force a gender identity on anybody. The Lord brought Judah low because they continually encourage moral decline. Surely, in the United States of America, we're not submitting bills that would seek to view pedophilia as a sexual orientation instead of a crime, right? Surely we wouldn't do that. Yeah, we did. Surely, in the United States of America, we're not offering birth control to first graders in our schools. Surely we wouldn't do that, right? Yeah, we are. Well, then surely we wouldn't offer the morning after pill to kids under 15. I mean, surely we'd be teaching them purity, right? No, they can get it as well. In fact, as you look at some of these things that are going on today, and some of you grew up reading about Spot or Dick and Jane. Now we've got kids' books. A is for activists. I actually have a copy of this out in my car. I should have brought it in this evening. Each page has got a different letter. You know, you get to L and it says, LGBTQ, love who you choose because love is true. Liberate your notions of limited emotions. Celebrate with pride our links of devotion. Now, for those of you not familiar with those letters, that would be lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and questioning. Surely, in the United States of America, we're not wanting to put more profanity in TV, right? Surely we wouldn't do that. Yeah, they are. Surely we're not writing books targeting 4 to 8-year-olds that is promoting this transgenderism idea. Folks, I didn't even know what the word meant at that age. You say, well, I'm glad my child's not that old yet. Well, that's all right. They've got them covered too. Because you see, we now have books that are going down to toddlers. This one's called Felicia's Favorite Story. It's about 2 lesbian women adopting a little girl, teaching her their lifestyle. In fact, that one may be a little bit too advanced for your child. So then we've got a little kid book called, Oh, the Things Mommies Do. What could be better than having 2? In fact, folks, there have been 9. Count them. 9 of these types of books mailed free of charge by homosexual activists to every public elementary school in the United States. I own 7 of them. I'm going to show you a couple of pages out of the one right here on the top right. It's called Daddy's Roommate. Here's what I want you to do. Understand, number 1, I'm not showing you the whole book because I can't stomach it. Number 2, I want you to imagine having your child walk down to the school library the librarian starts to read, my mommy and daddy got a divorce last year. Now there's somebody new at daddy's house. Daddy and his roommate Frank live together, sleep together. Mommy says daddy and Frank are gay. First, I didn't know what that meant, so she explained it. Being gay is just one more kind of love. And love is the best kind of happiness. Daddy and his roommate are very happy together. And I'm happy too. Folks, let me tell you something. That right there is wicked to plant in the heart and the mind of a child. The Lord brought Judah low because they encouraged moral decline. Surely, we're not offering a collegiate minor in queer studies in the United States, right? Surely we wouldn't do that. Yeah, we are. Surely in the United States of America, we don't have a web service that is targeting married people to commit adultery. Surely we wouldn't do that, right? And surely if we did, we wouldn't have millions and millions of people signed up for it. In fact, if you want to see how far we've come today, folks, take a look. This is a billboard. Used to say, thou shalt not commit adultery. They crossed out the not. And so we look and we realize we have absolutely no foundation. And the attacks on our kids are coming quite literally from every single angle. I've got a slide that I want to show you because I think it kind of sums up a lot of what I'm trying to say in just one slide. If you look carefully, lower left-hand corner is man, top right-hand corner is the word heaven. Now, what I did is I threw a couple of steps that it would take to get to heaven. Now, understand, I did not put every single little thing. But in order to get to heaven, a man has got to believe in God. But not just belief in God. We also have to, for instance, understand we were created by Him. We're here for a purpose. And not just that, we have to understand we were made in His image, which means we have a soul that is going to go somewhere after our death. But not just that, we have to understand we have free will. God loved us so much, He created each and every one of us with free will. Therefore, if we want to get to heaven, we have to obey the gospel. But not just that, we also have to understand there really was a guy named Adam, and because of his sin, man has been separated from God. Therefore, we're in need of a Redeemer named Jesus Christ. And we understand that at death, the soul lives on. So there you got a basic picture. Here's my problem. About every 2 years, I order most of the textbooks that I can get from major publishers. Textbooks that our kids are using. You open them up, the first thing you're going to notice, there is no God. So you got to take that step away. He's not allowed in the textbook, so we got to remove that step. As far as man being created by God, our kids are being told that we evolved from some Neanderthal-like creature. So we got to get rid of that step as well. As far as being made in the image of God, having a soul, they would say, look, there is nothing out there that's supernatural. There's only nature. So we got to get rid of that step as well. When it comes to having free will, they would say there is no such thing as free will because after all, there's just nature. There's nothing to obey. When it comes to Adam, they'd laugh. They'd say there is no such thing as Adam. In fact, they would say there's no such thing as absolute truth or right or wrong. And when it comes to death, our kids are learning that death is just the end. So folks, here's the problem. Instead of pointing our children to heaven, what those books are doing is they're painting a very gray picture, pointing them in the wrong direction. You say, okay, Brad, what's the solution? You've shared the problem. What's the solution? The solution is we have to have, notice that first word, active Christians who will humble themselves and engage two things. Number one, you got to engage your family. And number two, you got to engage your culture or your community. That means we got to stop letting everybody else raise our children or expecting them to raise our children, because that's not their job. Let me back it up with Scripture. 2 Chronicles 7:14. The Bible says, if my people who are called by my name, okay, who is that today? That's Christians. That's us. It says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves, pray, seek my face, and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, I will forgive their sin and heal their land. That's good news. Because that means if we'll actually do what he's saying, guess what? God's not going to release his anger, his wrath, like he did Judah and Israel. Last passage I'll give to you is this one. Acts chapter 10, starting in verse 34. Peter opened his mouth and said, in truth I perceive God shows no partiality, but in every nation whoever fears him and works righteousness is accepted by him. Every nation who, we got to go back, we got to learn the fear of the Lord. Not just that, we got to start working righteousness. We're doing something in June that I never ever thought I would do. And I'm going to tell you right up front, I don't have a clue about it because I've never done it. To my knowledge, in the church, we've never done it. But we're asking New Testament Christians to come together at our nation's capital. Please understand, let me get this out early. We're not trying to be political. What we want to do is we want to have a rally with New Testament Christians to focus on just two things. The value of human life, i.e. abortion, and traditional marriage. Because we think the Bible speaks pretty plainly on both of those. And we think that we haven't allowed our voice to be heard over the last 25 years. I go a lot of places and people say, what can we do about it? Well, there are a lot of things we can do about it. This is one of them. So we're encouraging people, hey, maybe it's time that we let our communities, our families, our friends hear the other side. Because, folks, I promise you, they've heard the media side. Now it's time that we let our communities hear God's side. We're going to take about a 10-minute break, let you guys get up, stretch your legs. Facilities are in the back. We'll come back at about 15 till. Thank you guys so much for your attention thus far.